All right, thanks so much, Aaron and Noah, for organizing this and for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be here today. So the first time I met Dan was as a really nervous but excited 17-year-old in my first few weeks as an undergraduate student at Penn. And I remember being kind of somewhat intimidated by the two layers of outer offices and administrative assistants that one had to navigate through to get to the inner sanctum of the chair's office. So my initial kind of excitement about the Code Lab had stemmed from an essay that Penn had all applicants write on the topic of whom we would like to work with if we were admitted to Penn. And I had written about my interest in the Code Lab's research on bio-inspired legged locomotion. And I conveyed this interest to Dan in my first meeting with him, and he seemed somewhat intrigued by the fact that I had found his lab website, and I actually managed to track him down. And he kind of kindly agreed to allow me to work in the group. He did, however, add the following caveat, which is that since you're just a freshman, you don't actually know anything, so we will find you something to do, but it might be cleaning our doorknobs. So I wasn't sure if the Code Lab's research had something to do with doorknobs, but I was happy nevertheless to be on the inside of the lab, even if it meant cleaning doorknobs. So I ended up spending all 4 years of my undergraduate years here at Penn working at the Code Lab, working with Kevin Galloway, with Clark Haynes, with Shai Revlin, and probably the most kind of substantial research experience was with Hal Gongsuoglu and Yasmin Aydin on trying to understand the relationship between the energy efficiency of the Rex robots and how close their center of mass dynamics look to those of a spring-loaded inverted pendulum. And I think looking back at these experiences now, it's really amazing to think about the impact that they had on me, not just in terms of technical topics, but really understanding the research process as a whole, all the way from conception to execution to publishing. And there's one kind of particular memory that really stands out in my mind, which is when Hal, Yasmin, and I had spent maybe a couple of months really working hard on a draft of a paper that we were planning to submit. And we went to Dan, I think feeling relatively happy about the way the draft looked. And Dan came back to us and said, oh, this is a pretty good draft. It's maybe only about 5 to 7 rounds of more iterations of edits away from being publishable. And I think this was a real lesson, not just in terms of technical writing, but also things like attention to detail and care that one needs to take when one is doing research. In addition, I think thinking back at my time now at the Code Lab, it had a massive impact on the way I think about research. So a lot of the work that I did during my PhD with Russ Tedrick was directly inspired by the work of Dan and collaborators on funnels. A lot of the conversations we had on the concept of programming work have inspired some recent lines of work in my own group now, thinking about the fundamental limits on safety and performance of robotic systems that are imposed by finite resources that a robot has in terms of sensing, memory, and computation. And in my mind, the Code Lab's research is really characterized by deep formal thinking combined with a real commitment to demonstrating this formal machinery on real robotic machinery. And that's something that I try to convey now to my own group. Beyond research influence, Dan also had a really massive and kind of tangible impact on my career trajectory. So at some point during my junior year, Dan called me into his office and asked me if I was interested in pursuing a PhD. So when I said yes, he gave me some homework to do, which was to go curate a list of about 20 to 25 different papers that I had enjoyed reading and take the union of all the last authors of those papers. So when I went back to Dan with that list, he went through each name really carefully, crossed out most of them, including his own, made a bunch of comments, which I won't repeat for about each person, and then finally kind of ranked the remaining names on the list. And at the top of the list was Russ Tedrick at MIT, and then helped me find a summer research internship with Russ, which eventually led me to joining his group as a PhD student a year later. And I think this ability to help students kind of find their own way, but also help them move forward when the time comes in the right way with the right people is something that I really appreciate now. So Dan, I think it's really hard to put into words just how much of an impact you had on my research career and on my life as a whole. It's kind of strange to think about what things would have been had I not written that essay about the Code Lab for my Penn applications. Yeah, thank you so much for all the guidance, all the research, all the experience over the years, and I look forward to many more years of being inspired by your papers, seeking your guidance, and having research discussions. Thank you so much.